It's certainly been a busy period for CyberCube, with a recent update of our enterprise intelligence layer and portfolio manager version 2. I'm Yvette, S of the CyberCube. Here with me to talk about those developments is Joshua Pyle, Actuarial Director for CyberCube. First of all, can you explain to me why did we feel that now was the right time to launch these new updates?
So formally, we maintain the right to update as frequently as every 6 months. In reality, it may be less frequent than that. In fact, we first launched Portfolio Manager in March of 2018, so it's actually been about 2 years, but a lot has happened since then. Cyber is a very dynamic peril, and we want to make sure we're reflecting the current threat landscape, events that have happened, new parameterizations. And as we're constantly sourcing new data, it felt like there was enough of an uplift to where we wanted to make this full model version update. But at the same time, we only want to make these changes when it's truly necessary. We don't want our clients waking up every day to a new set of numbers. We want that stability. All of our clients use this model for different purposes, but we want to sort of find that balance between responsiveness and stability. And it just felt like the right time. We had enough of a lift to where we went ahead and updated the model.
Would you mind explaining briefly to us what exactly is Portfolio Manager?
Yeah, Portfolio Manager is actually our flagship product. It's a catastrophe aggregation tool that allows a user to import a portfolio of insureds and look at catastrophic model loss across a variety of scenario classes. V1 of the product had 23 scenarios, and we've built a fully probabilistic framework to allow them to stress test for purposes of aggregation management.
Let's start with our enterprise intelligence layer. Can you explain briefly how does that work?
So the enterprise intelligence layer is a collection of firmographic data sources. In V1 of Portfolio Manager, we had just two data sources. Now we use four. And you can imagine this is collecting information on number of employees, revenues, industries, and it essentially serves as a backup to what's in the data schema today. So we do ask clients for this information at a portfolio insured level. Where that's not provided, we then try to match that portfolio entity to an entity in the enterprise intelligence layer and use that information to support our modeling. So it comes into play when we have lower quality information coming in through the schema, and it essentially builds robustness in the modeling results.
Could you explain to me what are some of the highlights of these launches and how will they benefit our clients?
Yeah, there have been quite a few changes we've made in this second version of Portfolio Manager. Importantly, we had 23 scenarios in the first version. Now we have 29. So we've added 6 new scenarios. It's also given us a chance to step back and revisit each module within the model. As you know, this is a linear process where we have frequency, event simulation, footprints, severity modeling, and a financial model. We've really stepped back and taken into account anything that we've seen, any occurrences, events, really reparameterized and reflected any changes in the competitive landscape. For example, within the cloud landscape, there's been a lot of movement among single points of failure, and so we want to reflect that wherever we can. We also have tweaked the scenario narratives for those existing scenarios just to build consistency and make sure that we've built in appropriate plausibility within the narratives. And finally, we've incorporated a couple of nice features around secondary modifiers for geography and security and intensity factors, trying to get at gradations of scenario classes.
Can we talk a little bit more about those scenarios? Given the landscape is changing so significantly for the cyber market, how do you decide which scenarios we should be adding?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're constantly reevaluating our scenario catalog. We want to make it as comprehensive as possible, but also plausible and near term thinking. In other words, self driving cars will eventually be an important issue in cyber, but it's not something everyone's worried about today. It's forward looking, a little bit sci-fi still, and we want to reflect reality, what people are talking about, what they're writing for. And so we're constantly evaluating whether we should actually remove scenarios or add scenarios to kind of build in that comprehensiveness. And so we've whittled down from a fairly large set of scenarios based on plausibility, based on how near term those are likely to surface, and decided on these 6 here.
Could we drill down in a little bit more detail, please, about secondary modifiers and intensity factors?
Absolutely. So we wanted to allow ourselves the option of explicitly modifying model losses for geography and security. So what this basically does is by scenario, by cost component, we now have factors that influence the modeled cost. An example of why this is important, if we think about geographies and litigiousness, you may see a different tendency to file a class action lawsuit or differences in settlement values based on whether you're in the United States or Japan or France or so on and so forth. Likewise, with regulatory fines and notification costs, there are a number of cost components that differ by geography, and this gives us a mechanism to reflect that. On intensity factors, this is our attempt to introduce scenario class gradations, like what we see in earthquake or hurricane space. So with earthquakes, for example, you would have a 5.3, 5.4, 5.5. And likewise, we're introducing scenario gradation intensities of 1, 2, and 3. You can think of this as more severe, average severity, or less severe variants of a scenario class. One example would be cloud outages, where we really want to help users answer the question, how bad could this be? What does a worst case scenario look like? So we would be introducing the idea of a longer cloud outage that would then flow through into the financial model loss.
Looking forward, do we expect future full version model updates?
Yeah, absolutely. Just like we see in the natural catastrophe space, we would fully expect to have a V3, a V4, a V5, so on and so forth. With each of these major model updates, we'll launch a thorough change management packet alongside to help users better understand the changes. And likewise, we want to build out multiple platforms to allow them to do stress testing. So right now with V2, we actually have built 2 environments, one for V1 and one for V2. And users can test and see what those changes look like real time.
So, for these future versions, what are our next priorities?
So there are quite a few things we still want to build out in future versions. A couple of the important ones are building attritional loss into the YLT. So right now, everything in Portfolio Manager is related to catastrophic loss. For underwriters and actuaries, it's important to have that attritional view as well. And so we're enabling the user to see that attritional modeled loss within the YLT. We're also introducing reinsurance. There are many different types of reinsurance. The most popular right now are quota share and per risk excess of loss. Down the road, we'll introduce facultative stop loss and surplus share as well. But we have the data schema fields already available today, and we want to build that into financial modeling. And then we also want to build out custom reporting dimensions. Right now, we report at industry level, company size level. We want to think beyond that, allow people to categorize as they wish and report back at dimensions important to them. One simple example would be east versus west versus north versus south, and give users the option of reporting back model results at that level of granularity. And then finally, we're doing a lot of work right now just generally on documentation. And we're trying to put that inside the product for ease of access. And so we're embedding all of that model methodology and documentation right now.
Josh, thank you very much for explaining those changes and also telling us about what lies ahead in the future. More information about Portfolio Manager version 2 can be found on our website, cybercube.com. For CyberCube, I'm Yvette Essen.